I'm about to tell you a story that will probably make some people hate me before it's even over, because I fell in love with another woman while I was still married. But if you think you already know how this story ends, trust me, you don't. The first time I realized I was completely screwed over this woman, she was standing barefoot in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, eating cold pizza straight from the box and laughing so hard she almost choked. I had known her for maybe 4 months, and I remember sitting there thinking, man, this is it. This is the person I want beside me when life gets ugly. She wasn't trying to impress me. Her hair was a mess, she was wearing one of my old shirts, and she had tomato sauce on her chin. But I couldn't stop looking at her. She caught me staring and said, "What?" I told her, "Nothing. You just look ridiculous." She threw a piece of crust at my face, and we ended up chasing each other around that tiny apartment like two idiots. That was us back then. Everything felt easy. We didn't have much money. Our furniture looked like it had been stolen from 3 different college dorms, and the heater made a sound like it was dying every night. But none of that mattered. I would come home, see her shoes by the door, and instantly feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We got married a year and a half later. Nothing huge, nothing fancy. Just close friends, family, cheap flowers, and a little rented place outside the city where the food was decent and the speakers kept cutting out. Bro, I swear, I barely noticed any of it. The second she started walking toward me, everything else disappeared. I had seen her in that dress before, because she was terrible at keeping surprises. But somehow, she still looked different. She looked nervous, happy, almost like she couldn't believe we were actually doing it. When she reached me, she whispered, "Don't cry." I said, "I'm not crying," while very clearly crying. She smiled and squeezed my hand so hard my fingers went numb. During the vows, she forgot half of what she wanted to say and just started speaking from the heart. She told me I made her feel safe. She said she never had to pretend around me. Then she looked right at me and said, "Even if we have nothing, I'll still feel rich as long as I have you." Man, that sentence stayed with me. I believed it completely. I built my whole idea of our future around it. Our first year of marriage was honestly one of the best years of my life. We had this dumb little routine that somehow never felt boring. On Fridays, I would bring home takeout, and she would choose a terrible movie that she claimed had good reviews, even though it was always some cheesy romantic thing where you knew the ending after 10 minutes. I complained every single time, but I watched every single one. On Sundays, we cleaned the apartment together with music blasting. She would dance with the mop. I would pretend I hated it, and then 5 minutes later, I'd be dancing too. We cooked together, burned food together, argued over how much garlic was too much, then ate the ruined meal anyway. Sometimes, we would sit on the floor because we didn't own a proper dining table yet. We talked about everything: kids, houses, places we wanted to see, stupid business ideas we would never actually start. She wanted a home with a big kitchen and a window over the sink. I wanted a small backyard and enough space for a dog. We even picked the dog's name before we could afford the dog. That's how serious we were about a life that didn't even exist yet. She was the person I called first, no matter what happened. Good news, bad news, weird news, it didn't matter. If my boss annoyed me, she knew before I even left the parking lot. If someone complimented me at work, I told her, because I knew she would act more excited than I was. And she did the same with me. She would send me random photos during the day: her coffee, a dog she saw outside, some ugly lamp she thought would look good in our place. Sometimes she called just to say, "I miss you," even if I had only been gone for 2 hours. I never found it annoying. Straight up, I loved knowing someone wanted me home that badly. At night, she would fall asleep with her hand on my chest, and if I moved away, she would pull me back without even waking up. Those tiny things got me, man. Not the big romantic stuff. The small things. The way she remembered how I liked my coffee. The way she saved the last bite for me. The way she could tell I was stressed before I said a word. I felt seen by her in a way I had never felt seen by anyone. We weren't perfect, obviously. We argued sometimes. She hated how I left wet towels on the bed. I hated how she opened every cabinet in the kitchen and somehow never closed one. Once we had a full argument because I bought the wrong kind of pasta. I'm serious. We were both tired, both hungry, and suddenly she was acting like I had betrayed the family by bringing home penny instead of spaghetti. 10 minutes later, she started laughing at how stupid it was, and I couldn't stay mad. That was the thing about us. We always came back to each other. No matter how annoyed we got, one of us would crack a joke, the other would try not to smile, and that would be it. We never went to sleep angry. That was our rule. Even when we disagreed, we still felt like a team. It was never me against her. It was us against whatever problem was standing in front of us. I trusted that more than anything. 2 years into our marriage, we finally moved into a better apartment. It wasn't some luxury place, but to us, it felt massive. It had actual sunlight, a balcony, and a kitchen, big enough for both of us to stand in without bumping into each other. The first night, we had no furniture, so we put a mattress on the floor and ate noodles from plastic containers. She looked around at all the empty space and said, "We're moving up in the world." I laughed and told her we didn't even own chairs. She said, "Not yet." That was how she talked back then. Everything was not yet. We didn't have the house yet. We didn't have the money yet. We didn't have the dog yet, but she always made it sound like those things were already on their way. And I believed her, because when she was beside me, the future didn't feel scary. It felt close. Like all we had to do was keep loving each other, keep working, and eventually everything else would fall into place. Looking back now, I think the happiest part wasn't the vacations or birthdays or anniversaries. It was the ordinary nights that nobody ever takes pictures of. I'd get home exhausted, toss my keys onto the counter, and before I even had my jacket off, she'd already be asking how my day went. Sometimes she'd have dinner ready. Other times we'd order something because neither of us felt like cooking. We'd eat on the couch, complain about work, laugh at dumb videos online, and argue over which show to watch. Every single night ended the same way. She would rest her head on my shoulder, and I would think, man, if life stays exactly like this forever, I honestly won't complain. I wasn't chasing some crazy millionaire dream. I didn't need a mansion or expensive watches. I just wanted enough money, so we never had to stress about bills, and enough time to spend with the woman I loved. That was my entire definition of success back then. People always ask if there were warning signs early on. Straight up, I don't think there were. At least not the kind everyone imagines after something falls apart. She wasn't cold. She wasn't distant. She didn't disappear for hours or hide her phone. She kissed me goodbye every morning. She texted me during lunch asking if I had eaten. She waited up when I worked late. On weekends, we would drive with no destination, just picking random roads, because she loved finding little coffee shops that weren't on social media yet. She'd always order something sweet and then steal half of my drink, because she said mine somehow tasted better. I'd pretend to be annoyed every single time, and she'd grin, because she knew I never actually cared. Those little moments stacked up until they became our life. That's why I never questioned anything. Why would I? From where I was standing, I had every reason to believe I had won the lottery. Her parents treated me like family almost immediately. Her dad would call me whenever something broke around the house, even if he already knew how to fix it. I think he just wanted company. We'd spend hours in the garage talking about sports, work, and whatever random topic came up, while pretending to repair something that really only needed 10 minutes. Her mom always packed food for us to take home. No matter how many times we told her we had groceries, she'd ignore us. Fill 3 containers anyway, then hug us both before we left. My own parents loved my wife too. My mom used to tell me, "Take care of that girl. Women like her don't come around often." Every time she said it, I'd smile, because I honestly believed I already was. I thought I was doing everything a husband was supposed to do. We talked about kids all the time without actually setting a date. We'd walk through stores and joke about tiny shoes or little strollers, wondering what our future son or daughter would look like. She insisted our kid would have my eyes because, according to her, they looked calm. I laughed because nobody had ever described me as calm before. We even argued over names just for fun. Every few weeks, one of us would come up with another possibility, and the other would immediately reject it. Looking back, those conversations felt so real that I could almost see that future already waiting for us. I never stopped to think that life could decide to go in a completely different direction. Money wasn't amazing, but we managed. We kept a little notebook in one kitchen drawer where we wrote down every goal we wanted to reach: save for a bigger apartment, take a trip to Italy, replace my old car before it completely died, buy a decent camera, because she always talked about wanting to learn photography. Every time we crossed one thing off the list, we'd celebrate like we'd just won the lottery. Sometimes, we'd open a cheap bottle of wine, sit on the balcony, and make another list of dreams that seemed way too big for people like us. She would always say, "One step at a time." I loved hearing that because it reminded me we were building everything together instead of waiting for someone else to hand us a better life. If someone had walked up to me during those years and said, 3 years from now, your entire life will be unrecognizable, I would have laughed right in their face. Seriously, I would have pointed at my wedding ring, looked over at my wife, smiling across the room, and said they had the wrong guy. I thought I knew exactly where my life was going. I thought I had already found the person I'd grow old with. I thought love, loyalty, and hard work were enough to get through anything. Back then, I couldn't imagine that something as simple as everyday life could slowly start changing people without either of us even noticing it. If I had to point to the exact moment things started changing, I honestly couldn't. There wasn't one huge fight or one dramatic event that flipped our lives upside down overnight. It happened so slowly that neither of us noticed it while we were living through it. One month, I'd stay a little later at work because someone called in sick. The next month, I'd volunteer for extra shifts because we were saving for the future. Before long, I had picked up a second job on weekends. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Just a few months, I'd save a decent amount, we'd get ahead financially, and then life would calm down again. That was the plan in my head. The problem was that life didn't care about my plans. The more I worked, the more expenses seemed to appear out of nowhere. Something always needed fixing, replacing, or paying off. I kept chasing this finish line that somehow moved farther away every single week. At first, she supported me. Every morning she'd kiss me goodbye and tell me she appreciated everything I was doing for us. She'd text me in the middle of the day saying she was proud of me. Those messages honestly kept me going during 12-hour shifts when my body felt ready to give up. I'd read them during my break, smile like an idiot, and think, man, this is exactly why I'm doing all of this. I wasn't working 2 jobs because I loved being exhausted. I was doing it because I wanted us to have the future we'd spent years talking about. I pictured that little house, the backyard, the dog, maybe kids running around one day. Every hour of overtime felt like another brick in that future. I never once thought I was sacrificing my marriage. I believed I was protecting it. Then something shifted. At first, it was just tiny comments. "You're always tired. We never go anywhere anymore. You don't even listen when I'm talking." She wasn't completely wrong. Half the time I was so exhausted that I'd sit down after dinner and accidentally fall asleep on the couch before the movie even started. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning with a sore neck, carry myself to bed, apologize, promise I'd make it up to her, then get up 5 hours later and do it all again. She'd sigh instead of smiling. She'd roll over instead of hugging me. They were small things, but after a while, they stopped feeling small. It was like every conversation somehow found its way back to the same problem. I wasn't home enough. I wasn't giving her enough attention. I wasn't the man she'd married. Every single time, I'd apologize because honestly, I understood why she felt that way. A few weeks later, the conversations weren't really conversations anymore. They became complaints. I'd barely get through the front door before she'd start. "Did you remember? We need a new washing machine?" My friend just bought a new SUV. Look at it. We seriously need better furniture. Then it got even more direct. Maybe you should ask for another promotion. Maybe you should find something that actually pays well. Go earn more money. I want to buy this. I want to buy that. At first, she'd laugh after saying it, like it was only half serious. Then the smile disappeared, but the words stayed exactly the same. Every week, there was something new she wanted. New clothes, a better phone, more vacations, a nicer neighborhood. I kept trying to explain that I was already working almost every waking hour. She'd shrug and say, then figure something out. Those 4 words started echoing in my head every night. The worst part wasn't that she wanted more. I understood wanting a better life. Hell, I wanted that too. What broke something inside me was that she stopped noticing everything I was already doing. She never asked how tired I was anymore. She stopped thanking me for working late. If I came home after 14 hours, she'd look at me like I'd somehow failed because I wasn't bringing home enough. I'd stand in the shower some nights, letting the hot water hit my face, trying to convince myself this was just a rough season. Every marriage goes through hard times, right? That's what everyone says. So I'd repeat it to myself over and over until I almost believed it. I'd tell myself she was stressed. I'd tell myself she missed me. I'd tell myself this wasn't really about money. If I could just keep pushing a little longer, everything would go back to the way it used to be. One Friday night, I got home close to 11 after finishing both jobs. My legs felt like concrete. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and all I wanted was to sit down for 10 minutes. The second I walked in, she was scrolling through pictures on her phone. Without even saying hello, she turned the screen toward me. It was some luxury resort one of her friends had visited. Look at this, she said. Why can't we ever do stuff like this? I stared at the pictures for a second, then looked back at her. Because I was busy working today, I answered quietly. She rolled her eyes. That's exactly my point. You're always working, but somehow we're still not living like that. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there staring out the window. For the first time since we'd gotten married, I caught myself wondering whether no matter how hard I worked, it would ever actually be enough. A couple of weeks after that, a new girl started at the company where I worked my weekday job. She looked completely lost on her first morning. Everyone else was too busy pretending they had important things to do, so our manager walked over to my desk and said, "Can you show her around? You've been here the longest." I shrugged and said, "Sure." It wasn't a big deal. I introduced myself, showed her where everything was, explained the software we used, who to avoid when they were in a bad mood, and which coffee machine actually worked. She laughed when I pointed at the broken one and said, "Trust me, that thing has destroyed more mornings than Mondays ever could." She had an easy laugh, the kind that made everyone around her loosen up without even trying. I didn't think anything of it. She was just another new employee, and I was just helping her settle in. Over the next few days, she kept coming over to ask questions. Some of them were real questions. Others were things she probably could have figured out herself if she'd spent 5 more minutes looking. But I didn't mind. She actually listened when I explained things instead of nodding, like she already knew everything. One afternoon, we grabbed coffee during lunch because everyone else had already left. We talked about work for maybe 5 minutes, then somehow ended up talking about music, traveling, embarrassing childhood stories, and places we wanted to see someday. It felt easy. That's the only word I can use. There wasn't any flirting. There wasn't any hidden agenda. It was just 2 people having a conversation that didn't feel forced. When lunch was over, she smiled and said, "Thanks. Today went way better than I expected." I smiled back and returned to work without thinking much about it. Except, it kept happening. A coffee here, a conversation there. Sometimes, we'd leave the office at the same time and walk toward the parking lot together. She had this habit of noticing tiny things everyone else ignored. A street musician playing outside, an old couple holding hands, a dog sitting in the passenger seat of a pickup truck wearing sunglasses. She'd point at something random, and somehow we'd spend 15 minutes laughing about it. I realized, one afternoon, that I hadn't laughed that much in months. That thought hit me harder than it should have. I got in my car, drove home, and spent the entire trip feeling guilty for something that hadn't even happened. I walked through my front door, hugged my wife, kissed her on the forehead, and told myself I was being ridiculous. The problem was that I started comparing things without meaning to. At work, someone actually asked me how I was doing and waited for the answer. At home, the first question was usually whether I'd picked something up from the store or whether I could work extra hours next week. I hated myself for even noticing the difference. Every time my coworker made me laugh, I'd remind myself that I had a wife waiting at home. Every time I looked forward to talking to her, I'd immediately force myself to think about something else. I wasn't looking for another relationship. I wasn't looking for an escape. I loved my wife. At least I believed I still did. I kept telling myself this little crush would disappear if I simply stopped feeding it. Then one afternoon, it hit me like a truck. We were sitting outside the office with coffee, and she was telling me about some stupid thing her brother had done over the weekend. She laughed so hard, she nearly spilled her drink. I wasn't even paying attention to the story anymore. I was looking at her smile, and this voice in my head quietly said, "You're falling for her." The second that thought crossed my mind, I felt sick. I ended the conversation early, made up some excuse about having work to finish, and walked straight back inside. For the rest of the day, I barely looked at her. I couldn't. It felt like I had already crossed a line, even though nothing inappropriate had happened. That evening, I sat in my car outside my apartment for almost 20 minutes before going upstairs because I didn't even know how to process what I was feeling. From that day on, I started pulling away on purpose. If she came over with a question, I'd answer it quickly and get back to work. If she invited me for coffee, I'd tell her I was busy. When everyone went to lunch together, I'd eat at my desk instead. I could tell she noticed. One day she walked over and quietly asked, "Did I do something wrong?" That question nearly broke me. I wanted to tell her the truth, that she'd done absolutely nothing wrong, that the problem was entirely in my own head. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "No, I've just got a lot going on." She looked at me for a second, like she knew I wasn't being honest, then nodded and walked away. Watching her leave honestly hurt more than I expected, but I kept reminding myself that this was the right thing to do. Every evening, I went home, determined to be a better husband. I bought flowers for no reason. I planned date nights that usually got canceled because one of us was too tired. I tried starting conversations the way we used to. I hugged my wife longer. I told her I loved her more often. I wanted us to find whatever we'd lost before it was too late. But somehow, every attempt ended the same way. She'd complain about money. She'd compare our lives to someone else's. She'd ask why we still couldn't afford this or that. I'd apologize, promise to keep working harder, and quietly swallow everything I was feeling. I never once mentioned the girl from work. Not to my wife, not to my friends, not to anyone. I buried those feelings as deep as I could because, in my mind, there wasn't even a choice to make. My marriage came first. It always would. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. The distance between us at work kept growing, and I made sure of it. If there was another empty seat in the meeting room, I'd take it. If she walked into the break room, I'd finish my coffee and leave. I even started coming in a little earlier, just so I wouldn't run into her before everyone else arrived. It sounds ridiculous now, but I was terrified that one innocent conversation would turn into something I could never take back. She deserved someone who was emotionally available, and I was a married man trying to fix his family. Every time I caught myself wondering how her weekend had been or whether she was okay, I'd force myself to think about my wife instead. I'd look at the wedding ring on my finger and remind myself why it was there. That little piece of metal wasn't just jewelry, it was a promise. I had made that promise in front of everyone I loved, and I wasn't about to throw it away because life had gotten complicated. She didn't give up immediately, though. One afternoon, she caught me while I was leaving the office. "Can we talk for a second?" she asked. I stopped because walking away would have been cruel. She looked confused more than anything. "I feel like you suddenly started avoiding me. If I said something wrong, I'd rather know." I looked down for a second because I couldn't meet her eyes. "You didn't do anything," I said quietly. "Seriously, you're a great person. I just, I need to focus on my own life right now." She frowned. "That's it?" I nodded. She waited like I was going to explain more, but I couldn't. If I opened that door even a little, I knew exactly where my heart wanted to go, and I refused to let it. After a long silence, she smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Okay, I get it." She turned around and walked back inside. Watching her leave hurt way more than I expected. But it also convinced me I was doing the right thing. I doubled down after that. No more coffee breaks. No more conversations unless they were strictly about work. If she asked for help, I answered in one sentence instead of 10. Other people in the office noticed the change too. One guy joked, "Did you two have a fight or something?" I laughed it off and said, "We were both just busy." The truth was a lot uglier than that. Every single day felt like I was fighting with myself. Half of me wanted to keep talking to her, because being around her made me feel alive again. The other half kept saying, "Go home, your wife needs you, your marriage needs you." That second voice always won, maybe not because it was louder, but because I couldn't live with myself if it didn't. I wasn't interested in becoming the kind of man who destroyed his own family. Chasing feelings he didn't even fully understand. The problem was that home no longer felt like the place I was fighting to protect. It felt like another shift I had to survive. I'd walk through the front door, hoping maybe tonight would be different, and within 5 minutes, we'd somehow be arguing about money again. "My friend and her husband are going to Greece this summer. Look at this apartment they just bought. Why can't we have things like that?" I'd explain for the 100th time that I was already working 2 jobs. She'd shrug like that wasn't enough. Then find a better paying one. Sometimes she'd leave shopping websites open on her laptop so I'd accidentally see the expensive bags, jewelry, and furniture she wanted. It stopped feeling like dreams we were building together. It started feeling like I was constantly being measured against men who earned more than I did. One night I finally snapped, but not the way you'd expect. I didn't yell. I didn't slam doors. I just sat down across from her at the kitchen table and said, "Can I ask you something?" She barely looked up from her phone. "What?" I took a deep breath. "Are you happy?" She was quiet for a few seconds before answering. "I'd be happier if we didn't have to worry about money all the time." That wasn't really an answer, so I asked again. "No, I mean with me, with us." She sighed like I was making things difficult. "I don't know. Things just aren't the same anymore." Hearing those words felt like someone slowly pushing a knife into my chest. I nodded because I honestly didn't know what else to do. Then I asked the question I'd been scared to ask for months. "Do you still love me?" She looked at me, hesitated for just a second, and finally said, "Of course I do. I'm just tired of living like this." I wanted to believe her so badly that I ignored everything else. I told myself we'd get through it. I told myself every marriage had seasons where people questioned everything. The very next morning, I made a decision that honestly changed more lives than I realized at the time. I walked into my manager's office, closed the door, and told him I was resigning. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're one of my best employees. What's going on?" I smiled and lied straight to his face. "Family comes first." He tried to convince me to stay. He offered better hours. He hinted there might even be a promotion soon. None of it mattered anymore. I had already made up my mind. If there was even the smallest chance that quitting this job would save my marriage, I was willing to give up everything else, including the one person who had unknowingly reminded me what it felt like to smile again. My last day at the office was honestly harder than I expected. I packed everything into one cardboard box, some notebooks, an old coffee mug, a couple of framed pictures, and a hoodie I'd somehow left hanging on the back of my chair for months. Everyone kept coming over to shake my hand, wishing me luck, and asking where I was going next. I gave the same answer every time. I just needed change. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The truth was that I was trying to save a marriage that felt like it was slipping through my fingers, one day at a time. As I carried the box toward the exit, I heard someone call my name. I already knew who it was before I turned around. She was standing a few steps away, with her hands in her jacket pockets. "So, you're really leaving?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah." She looked down at the floor for a second before forcing a smile. "I guess this is goodbye then." Neither of us moved. It felt like there were 1,000 things hanging in the air that neither of us could say. Finally, she laughed quietly and said, "You know, when I first started here, I was convinced you'd get tired of answering all my stupid questions." I smiled, despite myself. "You asked a lot of them." She rolled her eyes. "Yeah, I know." Another awkward silence followed. Then she looked straight at me and said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. "I hope whatever you're looking for, you find it." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her she deserved someone who didn't have to walk away. I wanted to thank her for making those miserable months bearable. Instead, I simply said, "Take care of yourself." Then I walked out without looking back because I knew if I did, I might not have the strength to leave. Driving home that evening, I actually felt hopeful for the first time in months. It sounds crazy now, but I genuinely believed I'd made the right decision. The temptation was gone. I could focus completely on my wife. We'd spend more time together. We'd fix whatever had broken between us. I even stopped on the way home and bought her favorite flowers. Nothing expensive, just the same ones I'd surprised her with back when we were dating. I walked into the apartment, smiling like an idiot, already imagining her face. She looked up from the couch for maybe 2 seconds. "What's that for?" she asked. "Just because," I answered. She thanked me, put the flowers in a vase, kissed me on the cheek, and went right back to scrolling through her phone. That tiny moment shouldn't have hurt as much as it did, but somehow it felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. The next few weeks were quiet. Almost too quiet. I found another job closer to home, but the pay wasn't as good as the previous one. I was still working long hours, just not two completely separate jobs anymore. I figured it would give us more time together. Instead, we somehow spent even less. She started going out with friends more often. If I asked where she was going, she'd just say, "Out." If I asked when she'd be back, she'd shrug and say, "I don't know." I told myself not to overthink it. She deserved time with her friends. After everything we'd been through, maybe she just needed space. Every time that little voice in my head whispered that something felt off, I'd shut it down. I trusted her. More than that, I wanted to trust her. About a month after I left the company, I got home from work on a Thursday evening. The apartment was unusually quiet. At first, I thought she'd gone to the grocery store. Then I noticed half the closet was empty. Her jackets were gone. Her suitcase was gone. The bathroom shelf, where she kept all her makeup, was almost completely cleared out. My stomach dropped so fast, I honestly thought I was going to throw up. I grabbed my phone and called her, straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. Again. Nothing. I started checking every room, like maybe I'd somehow misunderstood what I was seeing. But there was nothing to misunderstand. She hadn't stepped out for an hour. She had packed her life and left. Then I noticed a single folded sheet of paper sitting on the kitchen table. I already knew what it was before I opened it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold it. There were only a few lines written on the page. "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. I don't want this life. I thought I could, but I can't. I realized I want more than we're ever going to have together. I don't want to spend the rest of my life struggling. I want a husband who can give me the life I've always dreamed about. Please don't try to find me. It's over. That was it. No, I love you. No, maybe someday. No explanation beyond a few cold sentences. Just over. I read the note again, then probably another 20 times, because my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. 3 years together, a marriage, thousands of memories, thousands of promises. And in the end, the woman I'd worked myself into the ground for didn't leave because she found another man. She left because she wanted a richer one. I slid down the kitchen cabinet until I was sitting on the floor with that note still in my hands. I don't even know how long I stayed there, an hour, maybe 3. At some point it got dark outside, but I never turned the lights on. I just kept staring at those words, replaying every decision I'd made over the last year. I had walked away from the only woman who'd started making me feel alive again, because I believed my wife was worth fighting for. And now, I had neither of them. The weeks after she left didn't feel real. I wasn't living anymore. I was just existing. I'd wake up because my alarm went off, drag myself to work, come home, heat up whatever frozen meal I found in the freezer, and sit in complete silence until it was time to sleep again. Half the apartment was empty now, but somehow it felt even smaller than before. Every corner reminded me of her. The coffee mug she always used was still in the cabinet because she'd forgotten it. Her favorite blanket was folded over the couch. There was still one hair tie sitting on the bathroom sink. I couldn't bring myself to throw any of it away. Every night I'd tell myself I'd pack everything up tomorrow. Tomorrow turned into next week, then next month. I just wasn't ready to admit she wasn't coming back. People kept telling me the same things. You'll be okay. Time heals everything. You deserve better. Bro, I wanted to punch every single person who said that. Not because they were trying to help, but because none of those words meant anything when I walked into an empty apartment every night. I didn't want someone better. I wanted my wife back. I wanted my life back. I wanted to wake up and find out the last month had just been some horrible nightmare. Instead, all I had was a folded piece of paper sitting in my kitchen drawer that I'd somehow convinced myself not to throw away. I read that stupid note so many times that I practically memorized every word. Every time I did, one sentence hit me harder than the others. I want a husband who can give me the life I've always dreamed about. It replayed in my head over and over until I started believing maybe I really had failed her. About 2 months after she disappeared, I ran into an old coworker from my previous office at a gas station. We talked for a few minutes, mostly about work and how everyone was doing. Then he looked at me for a second and asked, "You heard about Emma?" My heart skipped for reasons I couldn't explain. I tried to sound casual. "No, what about her?" He smiled. "She's seeing someone now, some guy from another department. Nice dude, apparently." I forced a smile and said, "Good for her." We said goodbye and I got back into my car. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel for almost 10 minutes without starting the engine. I wasn't jealous. I didn't have the right to be jealous. I'd walked away. I'd made that decision myself. But hearing that she had moved on, while I was still trying to figure out how to breathe again, felt like someone quietly closing the last door that had accidentally been left open. For the first time since my wife left, I realized I'd truly lost everything. The marriage I fought to save was gone. The woman I refused to betray had found someone else. There was nothing left waiting for me anymore. That realization broke something. But strangely, it also set something free. One Saturday morning, I woke up, looked around the apartment, and asked myself a question I hadn't asked in years. What do I actually want? Not what my wife wanted. Not what society expected. Me. The answer surprised me because it came instantly. I wanted to leave, not forever, just long enough to stop feeling like every street, every coffee shop, and every room in that apartment belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. I'd always talked about traveling someday when we had more money, someday when life slowed down, someday never came. So I walked into the living room, opened my laptop, and started searching for the cheapest one-way flights I could find. 3 weeks later, I was standing in another country with nothing but a backpack, a cheap camera I'd bought secondhand, and absolutely no plan. The funny thing was, I wasn't trying to become some influencer or famous travel guy. I just needed something, anything, that would force me to stop thinking about my old life 24 hours a day. I started taking pictures because it gave me an excuse to pay attention to the world instead of my own thoughts. I'd post a few photos online with short stories about the places I'd visited, mostly because my parents wanted proof that I was still alive. Almost nobody saw them. 10 likes. Maybe 20 if I got lucky. I didn't care. For the first time in months, I caught myself smiling without forcing it. Not because my life was suddenly amazing, but because for a few minutes every day, my mind wasn't trapped in the past. I had no idea that one random photo, uploaded on an ordinary Tuesday with a caption I almost didn't post, was about to change my life in a way I never could have imagined. That photo wasn't even good by influencer standards. The lighting wasn't perfect, the composition wasn't anything special, and the camera I was using had probably seen better days 10 years earlier. It was just an old fisherman sitting alone on a broken dock, staring at the ocean while the sun disappeared behind him. What made people stop scrolling wasn't the picture, it was the caption. I wrote exactly what was on my mind. I said that sometimes you have to lose everything before you finally notice how big the world really is. I didn't mention my wife. I didn't mention the divorce. I didn't ask anyone to feel sorry for me. I just posted it, locked my phone, and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of notifications, then thousands. People weren't talking about the photo. They were talking about the story behind it. Strangers from different countries were sharing their own heartbreaks, failed marriages, and moments when life forced them to start over. For the first time since everything collapsed, I didn't feel completely alone. That one post turned into another, then another. Every place I visited came with a story instead of just a picture. I talked about getting lost in tiny towns where nobody spoke English. I wrote about eating food I couldn't pronounce. I posted videos of mountain roads, beaches that looked fake, old castles, crowded markets, and quiet mornings where the only sound was the wind. People kept following because I wasn't pretending my life was perfect. If I slept in a terrible motel, I showed it. If I missed a train, I laughed about it. If I got caught in a storm, halfway through a hike, I filmed myself looking absolutely miserable. Somehow that honesty connected with people more than expensive travel edits ever could. Every week, the audience doubled. 10,000 followers became 50,000. 50 became 200,000. Brands slowly started reaching out, offering free hotel stays, or asking if I'd review their products. At first, I said no to almost everything because I thought it was some kind of scam. Then one email completely changed the game. A travel company asked if I'd create a series of videos across Southern Europe. They weren't offering free products anymore. They were offering real money, more money for 2 weeks of filming than I'd earned in 3 months at my old office job. I read the contract 5 times because I was convinced I'd misunderstood something. I even called the company just to make sure they hadn't emailed the wrong person. They laughed and said they'd been following my content for months. They didn't want polished advertisements. They wanted exactly what I was already making. Real stories, real places, real reactions. I signed the deal the same afternoon. Standing in that tiny rented apartment with my laptop on the kitchen table, I couldn't stop smiling. It was the first time in years that money came from doing something I genuinely loved instead of something I barely survived. From there, everything snowballed faster than I could process. One collaboration led to another. Hotels invited me, tourism boards hired me, airlines started sponsoring trips. Then bigger creators reached out, asking if I wanted to film together. I met photographers whose work I'd admired for years, entrepreneurs who had built companies from nothing, people who had traveled to over 100 countries. Every conversation taught me something new. One guy showed me how to negotiate contracts instead of accepting the first offer. Another explained how to build a real business instead of just chasing views. Someone else convinced me to hire an accountant before my finances became a disaster. Looking back, I realized something that hit me hard. My life wasn't changing because I suddenly became lucky. It was changing because I had accidentally surrounded myself with people who thought bigger than I ever had. Instead of asking, "How do I survive this month?" they asked, "Where do you want to be 5 years from now?" Nobody had ever challenged me to think that way before. By the end of the second year, I wasn't just traveling anymore. I was running a company. I had editors, a manager, business partners, and investment advisors. I stopped spending every dollar I earned and started buying assets instead. My first property was a small villa near the coast that I rented out whenever I wasn't there. A year later, I bought another one in a different country because the first investment had performed better than anyone expected. Then came a third. I still remember signing the paperwork for that last purchase and suddenly thinking about the tiny apartment where my wife and I used to sit on the floor because we couldn't afford a dining table. Life had become almost unrecognizable, not because I had planned any of this, but because one painful ending had forced me to walk down a road I never would have chosen on my own. 3 years after the day I found that note on my kitchen table, I walked into the garage of my main house and honestly had to laugh. Parked in front of me were two cars I'd spent half my childhood staring at in magazines, convinced I'd never even sit inside one, let alone own them. My business accounts were thriving. My investments were growing. And after everything settled, there was well over $2 million sitting across my accounts. I owned 3 villas in 3 different countries, spent half the year traveling wherever I wanted, and woke up every morning excited about work instead of dreading it. The strangest part wasn't the money, it was the peace. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had stopped wondering whether I was enough. I had stopped measuring myself against other men. I finally felt like I was living my own life instead of chasing someone else's definition of success. I thought the past was behind me. I honestly believed those chapters had finally closed. Then one evening, my manager walked into my office, holding a tablet, looked at me with a weird expression and said, "Hey, does the name Sarah mean anything to you? Because I think you're going to want to see this."